The Christmas Will. O'Brien Brothers, Book 1 by A.S. McGowan. Chapter 1. Chicago, December 31, 1859. Ester Woods stepped off the train and onto the platform. Setting her carpetbag down, she glanced around. Her mother promised to meet her as soon as she arrived in Chicago. Maybe her mother decided to avoid the cold by waiting in the carriage. She picked up her carpetbag and headed toward the street. Instead of her mother's carriage and driver, Esther saw her mother's lawyer, Timothy McGill. She watched as a smile spread across the middle-aged man's craggy face. She gripped her carpetbag and headed toward him. Why was he here and not her mother? "Esther, darling, it is so good to have you back home," he said as soon as she reached him. Leaning in, he kissed the air next to her cheek. "Mr. McGill, it is good to see you as well." She set her carpetbag down and glanced up and down the street. Shivering, she pulled her wool coat tighter. "Esther, would you mind coming with me to my office? There are some things we need to discuss." He reached down and picked up her carpetbag without waiting for a response. "Mr. McGill, my mother is meeting me here. She is running late, and she will be much aggravated if I am not here when she arrives." "Esther, that is one of the things I need to talk to you about." He turned and began to walk down the street, as if he expected she would follow him. Realizing he was not going to stop walking, she hurried up behind him. "Mr. McGill, would you please tell me what is going on?" She reached out a gloved hand and gripped his shoulder. When he stopped walking and turned back to her, she tried to keep her temper in check. "What of my trunks? What if Mother arrives and finds me missing? You know she detests having to wait on people." "Esther, trust me, this is better discussed in private. Come along, lassie." He turned and continued back down the street. Mr. McGill's office was 3 blocks from the train station. Not the kind of office Esther would expect of a lawyer. Small and cramped, full of worn-out furniture, and papers littered the desk. When he sat her carpetbag down next to the chair, he went around his desk opposite of her. She sat in the worn chair he indicated, and waited for him to sit. Why would her mother's lawyer need to talk to her? None of this made any sense. 3 years passed since she last saw her mother. The past 3 years were spent at the prestigious school for governesses in New York, compliments of grandparents she never knew. One night they showed up, and from her bedroom, she heard her mother argue with them. She couldn't make out all the words from behind the door, but she heard enough to know that what they wanted upset her mother. They came back the next day, and she was forced to leave with them. The carriage ride to the train station was done in silence. The older couple sat ramrod straight, hands in their laps as they stared at her. The train ride to New York was no different. They spoke to her only when necessary. When they arrived in New York, she was escorted to the school and handed over. Simply abandoned. Her mother's letters, though, kept her abreast of what was going on with the people back home here in Chicago. Those letters were the only thing she had in her new world that reminded her that she was loved at least by one person. In fact, a letter from her mother reached her last week and spoke of how excited she was for Esther to graduate and be home in time to celebrate New Year's Eve together. She had spent the last hour on a train daydreaming about all the festivities she would enjoy with her mother tonight. "Esther, there are several legal matters that we need to clear up," he began. "Mr. McGill, I am not sure what you need to talk to me about, but I am very anxious to see my mother," Esther interrupted him. Her training screamed at her to not be rude and to speak politely. Ladylike manners at all times. However, this man's vagueness grated on her nerves. "Esther, that is what I need to talk to you about." He paused for a moment. "I am sorry, I forgot to offer to take your coat and gloves." "Thank you, but I assure you I am fine. Now please, what is all this about?" She would allow him to believe that she wished to not put him out. She wanted nothing more than to know why she was here, and she didn't want to tell him that his office was cold, thus distracting him further. "Your mother and grandparents were murdered on Christmas Eve." "Pardon me?" Did she hear him correctly? Her mother and grandparents could not have been murdered. He was mistaken. Christmas Eve was 7 days ago. She tried to recall the date written on her mother's last letter. If she could remember the date and it was later than Christmas Eve, then that would prove he was wrong. Her mother was still alive. I am sorry, child. Truly I am. Time is of the essence when it comes to their wills, though. Your mother states that you must sell the Peacock Club and use the money to start a more reputable business. Sell the Peacock Club. My mother loves that place. She would never want it sold, Esther protested. A shiver ran down her spine and spread through her body. This time it had nothing to do with the cold. I assure you, Mr. McGill, you are mistaken. My mother is still very much alive. She did love it. But she loved her daughter more. She wanted more for you than being a madam of a whorehouse. He shuffled a couple of papers, then held one up. The club is to be sold, and the money used to start a respectable business as we just discussed. Your grandfather left you his entire estate and control of his garment factory. All of his investments will also be transferred to you upon completion of the other terms of his will. All in all, you will live a comfortable life if you can handle the money properly. Handle it properly? You say that as if I am some feather-brained female that would spend it all on frivolous things. Tears burned her eyes and made her vision blur. Straightening her spine even more, she willed the tears not to fall. You are not listening to me. I said my mother is still alive. Her voice came out snapping and very unladylike. She didn't care, though. Not at this point where her mother's trusted lawyer refused to listen to her. Here, Mr. McGill said as he passed a white handkerchief across the desk. I know the news comes as a shock, but I assure you there is no mistake. The detectives are working to find the person responsible. Thank you. She dabbed the cloth against the corner of her eyes. Even though her heart was breaking, she knew she must remain the proper lady like her training demanded. Later, alone, she would allow herself that luxury of a full-on cry. You must know that my mother's profession means no one will look too hard to find her killer. Your mother's killer, I am sad to say, no one would look too hard to find. You are correct. But your grandparents' wealth and prestige will spur them into finding the killer. After discussing the situation further, she decided to allow Mr. McGill the task of finding a buyer for the Peacock Club. It seemed easier for her to be done with it quickly, and truth be told, she had no clue how much a whorehouse would be worth. Would anyone with money really want to own one? To her it was home, a home where all of her childhood memories centered. While it was a home she ran from as soon as the opportunity presented itself. She was grateful Mr. McGill thought ahead to set her up with a room at the hotel, down the street. With her mother gone, she did not want to spend any time at the Peacock Club. With all the unpleasant business out of the way, Esther stood and turned toward the door. Just as she opened it, Mr. McGill called her name. Yes. She turned back to face him. I almost forgot. Your grandfather's will also stipulates that you must be married within 1 year of his passing. You have until Christmas Eve of next year to have a husband. Did he just say that she had to be married? Her world spun, and a dull ache started behind her eyes when she walked out of the office. How could one find a husband on such short notice? Why would her grandfather ask such a thing of her? Even as she asked herself the question, the answer hit her. He didn't want her to end up like her mother. Just a few steps away from the office, she walked right into a solid wall. Stepping back, she looked up and realized the solid wall was a man. She looked into his dark eyes and a shiver ran down her spine. Pardon me, ma'am. His voice deep penetrated her brain, and she nodded in acknowledgement just as he stepped around her. Something about him unsettled her. She had come across a few men that made her feel that way at the Peacock Club. Normally, she was kept well away from the men who came there. Her mother's strict policy kept her hidden away most of the time, though occasionally she would be wandering around when a man would come in. Most were normal friendly sorts, such as Mr. McGill. Some, though, were just like this man, where evil seemed to radiate from them. Chapter 2. It had taken only 2 weeks to settle her mother's estate. With the money from the sale of the Peacock Club, Mr. McGill had helped her purchase a nice building in Boston. Everything was set, and she would be opening the doors soon to a few students. She made her way down the platform, followed by Mr. McGill's niece, Mary McGill, who would be accompanying her to Boston as her lady companion and chaperone. Once on the train, she led the way to their seats. One of those fancy sleeper cars would have been nice, Mary grumbled as she settled on the bench seat next to Esther. Yes, but these tickets were cheaper. We need to conserve as much money as possible until I receive my inheritance. Esther adjusted her skirt as she got comfortable on the bench. Removing her gloves, she placed them in her lap. It did not take long before the train departed the station, and she was on her way to a new life. This was not the first time she had boarded a train leaving Chicago. It was the first time she was leaving without anything or anyone to come back to, though. Esther, her mother's voice said her name. Turning, she looked at her mother, trying hard not to cry. Why did she have to leave? When the man and woman had come, Esther was so sure her mother would send them away. Yet here she stood at the train station being forced to leave her mother and head to New York. Fear bubbled up inside her, and she wanted to run out of the station. Run so far that the man and woman couldn't find her. She stepped into her mother's embrace and clung to her. The tears, no longer held in check, flowed freely down her face. I don't want to go, Mother. Why can't I stay here? Your grandparents have secured you a nice spot in a very nice school. Esther, this is your chance to get an education that will allow you a nice life. Her mother kissed the top of her head. Why do you call them my grandparents? They threw you away and in all these years never wanted to know me. Why now? She continued to cling to her mother, her tears soaking through the woman's blouse. Esther, it does not matter what they did in the past. What matters is that they are paying for you to have a life. Now it is time to go. Her mother released her, and taking her by the arm, walked her over to where the couple stood waiting. Esther, dear, you look frightful. A lady does not cry in public, her grandmother said. Handing her a handkerchief, she looked at Esther with what could only be described as shame. Now wipe your face before people notice. Esther took the handkerchief and looked at her mother before wiping her face. These people who called themselves her grandparents were not the loving grandparents she had dreamed of as a small child. They were very rigid and cold. Not once since the night they came to see her mother had either of them shown her a smidgen of affection. The abrupt stop of the train pulled her from her memory. She strained to see what was going on towards the front of the train car, but her view was blocked by a woman's rather large hat. Boots stomped against the floor. She turned to Mary with a quizzical look, and was greeted with an equally confused look on the other woman's face. Toss your guns down now, a male voice shouted. Put your hands in the air. Do what we say and no one gets hurt. Thuds sounded as guns began to hit the aisle. A man in a dirty white shirt with a dirty red bandana covering the lower half of his face came into view. He made his way down the aisle, collected the discarded guns. His eyes darted from person to person. Esther knew that when a man like that was nervous, things could turn deadly quickly. She'd seen nervous drunk men inside the Peacock Club. On more than one occasion, a gunfight had ensued. Another man appeared behind the first man. He was dressed equally as poor as his partner, and just as dirty. From where she sat, Esther could see the large sweat stain on the front of the man's blue shirt. His eyes were steadier than his partner's, as he stood at the front of the aisle pointing a pistol at the passengers. 2 more men came into the aisle carrying gunny sacks held open. Turn over all your possessions and no one has to get hurt, the man holding the gun announced. The 2 men with the gunny sacks made their way down the aisle, collecting the passengers' possessions. Fear pricked Esther as she sat staring straight ahead. A frenzy of rebellious anger made her tremble. How dare these men point guns at them and make demands? The sheer audacity of their thievery made every fiber of her being object. A man seated across from her began to pull out his coin purse, then removed his silver pocket watch. She couldn't believe the man was so willing to surrender these possessions. By the looks of the man, she had pegged him as someone who would try and stop the robbers. She looked him in the eyes, silently pleading with him to do something. The man simply blinked his green eyes and said nothing. So much for him being the one to protect them. The masked man made his way to them and held out the gunny sack to the man across from her. He dutifully dropped the coin purse and pocket watch into the sack. Beside her, Mary reached out and dropped her meager possessions into the sack. The man turned towards her, and her sensibilities flared. Fear, though, had her heart beating frantically in her chest. She wanted to take this man to task, but she didn't want anyone on the train to get hurt because of her. Silently, she dropped her coin purse into the sack. Reaching up, she pulled the sapphire and diamond earrings her grandmother had given her the day they dropped her at the school into the bag. While they held monetary value, they were of no sentimental value to her. She thought the gunman would walk away. When he continued to stand there, her heart beat faster. Why wasn't he moving on? She gave him what he wanted. He stared at her neck and jerked his head at her. "The chain, ma'am," the masked man said. Her hand flew to her neck and clutched protectively over the thin gold chain. Her mother's fingers were slender, in contrast to Esther's thick fingers. There was no way that the one piece of jewelry she kept of her mother's would fit on her finger. Instead, Esther had placed it on a thin chain and wore it around her neck. "Please, it is my mother's ring." "Hand it over." "You don't understand, it was my mother's ring. It is all I have left," she pleaded. "Just give it to him," the green-eyed man said in a calm that infuriated her more than the robbers. She could hear the muttering of the other passengers. She knew that nothing was worth someone getting hurt over, yet she couldn't bring herself to hand over the only thing she had left of her mother. Her hand stayed protectively clutching the chain. Defiantly, she glared up at the robber. His eyes were small and black. Mean eyes. The eyes of a killer. She caught the glint of the pistol as he raised it, pointing it directly at her face. She hadn't planned to die today. The victim of a train robbery. The logical part of her brain told her to give it up, as it wasn't worth dying over. Yet the child in her clung to the chain that held the only thing she had left of her mother. She could hear Mary next to her pleading with her to hand it over. She heard the click of the hammer. Panic clawed for release, but Esther refused to give in to the emotion. She pressed her eyes tightly shut and sent up a silent, frantic prayer. "We ain't got all day." "Hurry up down there," one of the other thieves shouted from the front of the train car. Esther opened her eyes just as he leaned in towards her. She could smell the stench of whiskey and sweat. She flinched back away from him. He raised the pistol as if to strike her with it. Instinctively, her hand flew from her neck to protect her face. In the next instant, the man had yanked the chain from her neck. The metal bit into her flesh before breaking free. A small cry escaped her as the man turned and headed back the way he had come, with her mother's ring still clutched in his fist. "That was very stupid of you. You risked lives over a piece of jewelry," the man across from her chastised. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was the only thing she had left of any sentimental value. All those robbers saw was the money the ring would bring them. They would not see the hard life lived by a loving mother, or the sacrifices her mother made for her every day of her life. Other than her small amount of coins in her coin purse, the rest of her money was safely tucked away in the trunk secured in the baggage hold. That money would see her through until she got her inheritance. Silently, she sent up a prayer asking God to see her through so that she may create a life in Boston that would make her mother proud. Chapter 3. Boston, August 1860. Esther walked around the table and observed the girls seated at the long wooden table. The table was long enough to seat 6 more girls, and she hoped to have those other 6 chairs filled one day. All her hard work since arriving in Boston was paying off. Applications were coming in the mail daily. She needed to go through them and issue acceptance letters, but she was looking for just the right students. The girls who would benefit the most from what Woods Academy of Proper Young Ladies had to offer them. "Now, ladies, take your napkins and place them neatly over your laps," Esther told them. She continued to walk around them as they moved to do as they were told. "Ladies, back straight." 2 girls straightened their backs. These 4 girls came from decent middle-class families. Their manners were adequate, but they lacked the refinement one would see in a true proper lady. That is where she came in. It was her job to refine them into ladies. "Now take up your spoon and hold it just like this." She indicated how the spoon should be held. "You will then scoop up your soup, moving the spoon away from your body. Slide the bottom across the rim of the bowl, and then bring the spoon to your mouth." She watched as each girl ate a spoonful of soup. "Remember not to lean toward your bowl. Always remain straight and bring it to you. Sip from the side of the spoon like this." She demonstrated how to sip from the side using her empty spoon. The point of the spoon must never go into your mouth, ladies. Try again. "Excuse me, miss," Mary McGill said as she came into the room. Esther was grateful that the woman had agreed to accompany her to Boston this past February. "You have a caller. I showed him to your office." "Thank you, Mary. Would you mind working with the girls while I am gone?" Esther left the girls in Mary's capable hands and headed to her office. She wished Mary would have at least told her who was waiting for her. When she stepped into her office, she saw that the caller was her fiancé, Charles Chesterfield. He sat behind her desk looking at some papers. He jumped and dropped them when he heard her come in. "I am sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." She quickened her pace to him and kissed his cheek. He returned the simple gesture of affection. "What do I owe this surprise?" "I came by to see if you would honor me the pleasure of having dinner with Mother and I this evening." He let his hand run down her arm. "I would be delighted to have dinner with you tonight." She kept her thoughts of his controlling mother to herself. She knew how much he doted on his mother, and for his sake, she tried hard, desperately hard to get along with her future mother-in-law. "Perfect, it is settled then. I will pick you up around 7. With that, he turned and left her standing in the office alone. She moved to pick up the papers from the floor that he dropped. They were the applications that she had been thinking of going through. Why was Charles looking at applications sent to her school? She straightened the papers and placed them back on the desk. He must have just been bored while he waited for her to join him. Of course, that had to be it. After all, he had no other reason to be looking at them. True to his word, Charles arrived to pick her up on time. She stepped out and took his offered arm as he escorted her to the awaiting carriage. Her mother had a carriage when she was alive, but nothing this fancy. Growing up, Esther had eagerly awaited those special moments when her mother would take her for a carriage ride around the park. They never stopped and walked around the park like so many others did. Instead, they always stayed inside the carriage and made one circle around the park before heading home. When she was very young, she did not understand why they could not stroll through the park like the other mothers and their children. She would beg her mother tirelessly to get out of the carriage and walk. Always her mother would refuse. As she got older, she understood why they never ventured out of the safety of the carriage. Nonetheless, Esther enjoyed the brief rides through the park. Smiling, she allowed Charles to help her up. She settled on the seat as Charles helped Mary into the carriage. Once both women were settled, he climbed in and settled across from them. The driver shut the door, and within a few minutes, they were moving through Boston toward Charles's home. When the carriage came to a stop, the driver opened the door to allow Charles to exit. Reaching his hand up, he helped her alight the carriage. Standing on the sidewalk, she looked past him at the 2-story Victorian-style home where he lived with his mother. No matter how many times she has visited here, the sheer size of the home amazed her. She was a fraud and didn't belong here. No matter how wealthy her father had been, she was still the bastard child born to a whore in a whorehouse. No matter how proper she behaved, she feared the day would come that someone would see beneath the facade and deem her unworthy. In the dining room, Charles's mother took up the head of the table, with Esther to her right and Charles to her left. Even though Charles's father died 20 years ago, when Charles was just 3 years old, his mother continued to wear black in mourning. Esther assumed the woman must have loved her husband something fierce to remain a widow and in mourning for so long. Charles and Esther had a genuine affection for each other, just nowhere near the deep kind of love his parents must have shared. In time, though, she knew deep love would come. The dining room maid entered the room and placed a salad plate in front of each of them. When finished, she moved back from the table and stood slightly to the right of Mrs. Chesterfield. "That will be all, Olivia," Mrs. Chesterfield said. "Yes, my lady," Olivia responded to the dismissal before leaving the room. Picking up her fork, Esther took a small bite of her salad. She was used to the silence that accompanied dinners at the Chesterfield house. No one ever spoke until Mrs. Chesterfield started the conversation. Esther much preferred the ease of dining in her private quarters with Mary. However, Mary was sent to dine with the servants whenever they were at the Chesterfields' home. She had asked the first time she was invited to dinner here with Charles and his mother, and was quickly told that although Mary was her lady companion and chaperone, she was still hired help. Putting a small forkful of salad into her mouth again, she wondered when Mrs. Chesterfield would break the imposed silence. Usually, the older woman would talk about the goings-on of Boston society. Occasionally, she would speak of the rising tensions within the nation. Mrs. Chesterfield believed that people who were poor or of loose morals were to blame. Charles, she learned, agreed with his mother on every subject. Her disdain for the poor kept Esther on edge. Definitely a conversation topic she much preferred to avoid whenever possible. As the wedding drew near, she also dominated the dinners with talk about the wedding. She afforded Esther very little say in the matter. It didn't take long to realize that this was Mrs. Chesterfield's wedding, not hers. Instead, she was merely a prop in her own wedding. "Do you still only have the 4 students?" Mrs. Chesterfield asked, finally breaking the silence. "Yes, ma'am. I do have a lot of applications that need to be looked over. With the girls' dorm finished, we can now take on more students," Esther responded. A small sense of pride swelled in her. The Lord truly was blessing her. "That is good news. You need to dismiss the ones you have. Focus on girls of good breeding, like the daughters of Boston's society," Mrs. Chesterfield said, before placing a small bite of salad into her mouth. "I want the school to focus on girls who can benefit from proper schooling," Esther said. "Esther dear, those girls will not benefit from any training. They will never be proper ladies," Mrs. Chesterfield countered. "No matter. Once the 2 of you are married, you can focus on training proper ladies to be proper ladies. Mrs. Chesterfield, I have no issue with taking students from Boston society's families. Though I do want to keep helping those girls who need it." She wished she could get Mrs. Chesterfield to see the importance of helping these girls. She feared, though, that the older woman would never understand what it was that Esther was doing and trying to accomplish. "Esther, be realistic. If you allow those kinds of girls to be at the school, well-bred families will not send their daughters there," Charles injected. "I saw one application today was sent in for a colored girl." "A colored girl?" Mrs. Chesterfield gasped. "Esther, you can't seriously be thinking about allowing a colored girl to attend. This is not the South. They are not slaves, so why wouldn't I consider her application?" "No, this is not the South, and we are not talking about slaves or non-slaves. A colored, no matter how much schooling or training, will still be a colored. There is no lady to be had there," Charles said. "Esther, I spoke with a friend of mine just the other day. She is looking for a school for her granddaughter. Mrs. Chesterfield sat her fork on top of the remains of her salad. I cannot in good conscience recommend your school if you are taking in all sorts of immoral girls. These are not immoral girls, Mrs. Chesterfield. They are good girls who need the training that we provide. Charles, you deal with this. She is your fiancée, your wife in training. Mrs. Chesterfield pushed back from the table and left them. I am sorry, Charles. I did not mean to upset her. Esther placed her hands in her lap and cast her eyes down. The situation had clearly gotten out of hand. She truly had not meant to upset his mother. It was just that she couldn't sit and say nothing while they spoke harshly against young girls who had done nothing wrong. They were judging these girls based on their birth or color, the same way she herself had been judged harshly as a child. No worries, my dear. Mother will be fine. I must admit, I do agree with her. I can't have my fiancé running a school for proper young ladies and accept colored girls into it to learn right next to proper Christian white girls. He offered her a smile that one would expect from a parent patronizing a child. What next, Esther? Will you start accepting those Indians? I can just see those savages running around the school. They finished the rest of dinner in silence. Charles escorted her and Mary by carriage back to the school, where he bid her a good night. A simple peck on her cheek, and he waited for her to slip inside. Heading toward her private quarters, Esther replayed the conversation from dinner. She knew Charles and his mother were social climbers, but the snobbery tonight was more than usual. This level of snobbery, as her mother used to put it, burned her biscuits. Inside her private quarters, Mary began to help her dress for bed. How did the dinner go? Mary asked as she unlaced Esther's corset. I upset Mrs. Chesterfield, and she left the table during the salad course. A very unladylike giggle escaped past her lips. Her hand flew to her mouth and she struggled to gain her composure. Olivia mentioned in the kitchen that Mrs. Chesterfield was absent during the rest of dinner. That woman has her corset on too tight, if you ask me, Mary said with no hint of humor in her voice. Charles adores his mother. Most times I can get along with her. However, tonight she was just so snobbish. Mary nodded and continued in silence to help Esther into her nightgown. Once in her nightgown, she sat and allowed Mary to brush out her hair. About 20 minutes later, Mary excused herself to head for bed. Esther crawled into her bed and, not for the first time, wished she had longer to find a husband. She knew she was rushing into things faster than one should, and there was so much she still did not know about Charles. She missed her mother so much. What would her mother think about a man like Charles? Surely, her mother would approve, since he was a man of society and a polite gentleman. Chapter 4. Chicago, August 1860. William Warner walked into Harrington House Gentlemen's Club. He saw a few of Chicago's elite gentlemen sitting in high-backed chairs smoking expensive cigars, the smoke swirling up from the cherry-red tips. Here, away from the ladies, a man could smoke and drink in peace. Tonight, he was not here for a good port or cigar. No, he was here for the games. Tonight was his night to hit it big, he felt it in his bones. Approaching the card table, he saw an empty seat. Room for one more? He asked, as he nodded a greeting to the four gentlemen seated. When they nodded, he slipped into the seat and waited for the dealer to shuffle the deck. I was sorry to hear about your father, Mr. Warner, a portly balding man said. Thank you. He will be truly missed. He looked at his cards and placed 3 face down. He slid them back to the dealer. I agree, he will be missed. He was a fine man, another man at the table said. William waited until the dealer finished dealing new cards and grabbed up the 3 dealt to him. Looking at his hand, he tried to maintain his best poker face. In his hand he held 2 aces, a pair of 3s, and a queen. Not the best hand, but not the worst he has ever had either. Luck was with him tonight, so his mediocre hand could still be a winner. Games had been won with less before. When the bidding finished, the 5 men laid their cards face up. The portly balding man reached out and pulled the money toward him. William looked and saw the man's hand held 3 kings. Oh well, the night was still young and tonight was his night. James, that is just not fair. It is the 5th hand you have won tonight. If I didn't know better, I would say you were cheating, the man next to William exclaimed. Oh Thomas, you are just jealous that you ain't as good as I am. James laughed as he straightened his winnings on the table in front of him. A scantily dressed woman carrying a wooden tray came up to the table and sat a glass of whiskey next to each man. William picked his up, and with a slight salute at the woman, he took a sip. A blush crept up her cheeks, and he couldn't help but laugh. A couple of hours later, William rose from the table and bid the men good night. His mood was sour as he stepped into the night. His driver was waiting with the carriage out front, and rushed to open the door when he saw him coming. Stepping up into the carriage, he looked back at the Harrington house and let out a string of curses. He had been so sure that tonight was his night. How could it have all gone so very wrong? How could he have lost so much? On the ride home, he thought of his mother. The disappointment she would have in him if she ever knew what he had done. Chapter 5. John O'Brien sat at his desk penning a letter when a man in a 3-piece suit walked in and took a seat opposite him. Looking up from the letter, he held the pen and gave the man a cursory glance before he went back to the writing his letter. Nothing bothered him more than an arrogant bastard who walked into his office like he owned it. The man's facial expression and posture screamed smug confidence. That smug confidence that screamed how much superior he thought himself to be. Well, John had news for him. Here in this office, John was the superior one. Mr. O'Brien, correct? The man asked, his voice laced with impatience. Looking up from his letter, he gave the man another once-over. Well, at least the man knew his name. Yes. I was told you were the one I needed to see. I have a delicate situation that I need taken care of. He crossed his ankle across his knee and sat twiddling his thumbs. Look, mister, I have a lot to do, so just get to it. He drummed his fingers against the desk. His uninvited guest was not the only impatient man in the room. He had learned that when a person started with the term delicate situation, they spent a lot of time talking in circles. He hated having his time wasted like that. Mr. Warner. William Warner. A couple of months ago, a young woman came to see my father. No one knew what the meeting was about, but my father seemed upset after she left. A month later, my father passed away. I noticed then that his shares of the steel conglomerate were missing. I have looked everywhere, but I am unable to find them. I found out she stole them sometime after meeting with him and his passing. I need you to find her. He stopped twiddling his thumbs but kept his fingers laced. Does she have a name? His fingers drummed faster on the desk. It really rubbed him wrong when he had to ask the obvious questions from someone who gave no indication of being in distress. He understood that people in distress needed coaxing when talking with him. However, this man wasn't in distress and was wasting his valuable time. Her name is Ester Woods. I found out she is the bastard child of my father and a common whore. He spit the words out as if they had sat for too long in his mouth and turned foul. Are you sure your father did not simply give them to her? John asked. Something very curious was going on. The man's story and body language said he wasn't telling him the whole story. It would not be the first time a man gained a conscience and decided to do right by their illegitimate children. My father would not have done that. The man shot out of his seat and slammed his palms down on the desk as he glared down at John. His will left everything he owned to my mother and me. Then that means if she has them, she stole them. So you want me to track her down so you can get the shares back and prosecute her? John understood how some people got angry and felt hurt when faced with betrayal. Yet, this man's anger read completely over the top for the situation. John had not gotten where he was without gaining the ability to read people. However, his curiosity was piqued just by what was going on here. That is exactly what my mother and I want." He took his seat again, apparently appeased that John said the woman stole the shares. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. "This is her." He handed the photograph across the desk. "So, can I count on you to find this woman for me?" "Let me see what I can do. It may take a bit, but I will find your sister." He smoothed one side of his mustache with his free hand. "She is not my sister." He glared at John with unconcealed contempt. Good, John loved knowing he found a way to goad this arrogant man. As a Pinkerton agent, he worked for all sorts of arrogant bastards. He did his job, and he did it well. It didn't mean he had to like them, though. With William Warner gone, John held the photograph and stared at the lovely face that stared back at him. She didn't look like the sort that would go around stealing. However, he had learned a long time ago that looks could be deceiving. Especially when it comes to lovely-looking women, they could be the most deceptive and the most dangerous. There was one woman in particular, Catherine Davenport, who was the true meaning of angelic beauty. She had the looks that turned men's heads and was well-spoken. He found it easy to have a decent, intelligent conversation with her. Her charm swirled his brain in a fog. So much so that he failed to realize until it was too late just how deceptive and dangerous she was. Turns out she was a married woman. A married woman who liked playing other men to make her husband jealous. She didn't care that her husband would find these men and beat them almost to death. He pulled his thoughts back to the present. He didn't care how lovely Miss Woods was or how charming she might be. He planned to find her and bring her to justice. It was up to the courts to decide if the late Mr. Warner legally gave her the shares or if she stole them. He only had one job, and he planned to do it and get it out of the way. That evening, John walked through the door of the run-down two-story house that belonged to his mother. Entering, he could smell the aroma drifting from the kitchen, and his mouth watered. Even with what little they had, his mother always managed to ensure that her family ate good. As he walked into the sparse kitchen, he saw her standing at the wood-burning stove that served both cooking and heating for their home. His mother stood stirring something in the large cast-iron pot. He watched her until she turned. Her face lit up upon seeing him. "John, go wash up. Dinner will be ready soon." "Yes, ma'am." He moved to the wash basin and poured a bit of water from the pitcher. Wetting his hands, he grabbed the bar of soap and lathered up, then rinsed with the water in the basin. He grabbed the threadbare towel she kept next to the basin. "So, how was ye day?" "It was good, Ma, real good." He moved to the scarred wooden table and sat down. Within a couple of minutes, she brought him a bowl full of stew. "So, how was your day?" he asked when she returned to the table and sat with her bowl. "Me day was good. Would you like to say the blessing?" She didn't want for a response. Instead, she bowed her head and waited. "Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts which we are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen." Once the blessing had been said, he realized the house of silent. Too silent for a house that housed 10 men and his mother. "Where is everyone?" "Ye brothers are all off doing what they do, school, work, girls," she said dismissively with a wave of her hand. "Have you heard from our charming Texas Ranger?" he asked, realizing that he missed his older brother. With David now in Texas, it fell to John to be the man of the house. A duty he took seriously and yet wished had not fallen to him. David was better at handling the younger of their brothers. Unlike David, John didn't have the ability to smooth his brother's ruffled feathers. Not since the last letter. To tell you the truth, I worry about that boy. A man needs a wife, and a boy needs a mother. I fear, though, that me grandbaby won't be getting a mother any time soon. But Angela's death hit him hard. Can't blame a man for not wanting to go through that pain again. Or for running away from the neighborhood, for that matter, John thought to himself. He knew that it was hard for David to be where so many memories of Angela remained. A boy needs a mother. David needs to think about his son, not himself, she snapped. So says the woman that never married after her husband died, he responded. There not be one man on this earth that could replace me, Angus. She smiled again at the mention of her deceased husband. I know, Ma. He was a good husband to you, and a good father to us. I think David feels the same way about his Angela. He reached out and patted her hand. His mother was always a worrier. The type of mother that would worry herself into an early grave over her child. With 10 sons, that meant a lot of worrying for someone like her. He knew how blessed he was to have her in his life. After dinner, he reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. Setting it on the table between them, he pushed it toward her. I got my wages today. There is enough there to pay for 2 more lectures for Matthew. He will pay ye back once he become a doctor, she said as she took the envelope in her hand. I am not worried about him paying me back, Ma. I am just glad that I make enough to help my brother fulfill his desire to be a doctor. Come on, we have all known since he was young that it was his God-given calling. He knew it embarrassed his mother to take money from her sons. Each and every one of them, though, had no problem contributing their earnings to help each other rise above the poverty they were born into. He was exactly what he wanted to be in life. His brother David was happy to be a Texas Ranger. Matthew and Michael dreamed of being doctors. Michael had gotten an apprenticeship in England, and everyone worked hard to get him that passage. Now they worked hard to pay for Matthew's lectures here in America. Chapter 6. Boston, August 1860. Esther placed her white linen napkin on her lap as soon as she sat down. Next to her, at the small table in the dining room of her private quarters, sat Mary McGill, and at the opposite end of the table across from her sat Mary's gentleman suitor, Mr. McSpadden. Her eyes grew wide as he tucked his napkin into the collar of his shirt. While a rich man, having struck gold in California, he was far from a refined gentleman. What did Mary see in this man? Surely, her companion was not so shallow as to look at his wealth. Who are you to talk, Esther? Are you not yourself marrying for money? She truly did have an affection for Charles, but she knew in her heart that she did not love him. Love will come with time, something she continually told herself. Many successful marriages started out as arrangements or affection, and turned to love, and she clung to that concept. Mrs. Wong came in carrying a large white serving dish. She set it down in the middle of the table, then left as quickly as she had come. Esther had learned from the beginning that her maid was a woman of few words. In the beginning, it bothered her, because she wanted to get to know her maid. Time and again, she would try to engage the Oriental woman in conversation. Unless her questions related to work, Mrs. Wong rarely answered. Esther knew Mrs. Wong was married, but did not know if she had any children, nor did she know exactly what country the woman had immigrated from. The smell of roast beef, potatoes, and carrots teased her nose and dispelled any thoughts of Mrs. Wong and her silent behavior. Being the polite lady hostess, she indicated with a sweep of her hand that Mr. McSpadden should serve himself first. He practically jumped out of his seat and grabbed the dish. Holding it sideways, he shoveled food out of the dish and onto his plate. With his plate piled obscenely full of food, he set the dish down and resumed his seat. Esther looked on in horror, and Mary hesitated in her seat. Esther smiled at the other woman, and with a small nod, indicated she should serve herself next. Mary did her best to split the meager bit of food left with Esther. Esther looked at Mary and her meager portion, and then back at Mr. McSpadden's full plate. The man was an ill-mannered pig. She bit back the urge to tell the man just that, and settled into her seat with her back straight, her fork delicately in her right hand, and her left hand rested primly in her lap. After savoring a small bite, she looked over at Mary. "Have you spoken with Mr. McSpadden about the progress Sarah has made?" Esther asked, referencing the man's niece. When she had come to the school a little over 2 months ago, she was without any proper manners or ladylike skills. Now the girl excelled in manners and ladylike skills that would make her a proper young lady. "We spoke of it earlier this evening. I am very impressed with how quickly she is learning. Mary responded as she looked adoringly at Mr. McSpadden. He held his fork in his right hand and his knife in his left with his elbows on the table. When Esther looked over at him, he had his mouth full of food and bobbed his head up and down while bouncing his elbows on the table. He chewed fast and swallowed hard. What did Mary see in this uncouth man? Sorry. He grabbed his water glass and drank half of it before setting it back on the table. Yes, Mary did speak to me earlier about the girl. It is good she is coming along so nicely. With the proper training, I bet I can get her married to a proper businessman here in Boston. Not waiting for any reply, he went back to shoveling food into his mouth. I noticed your Charles came calling today, Mary said after a bit of silence. Yes, he came by and wanted to see the books for the school. Why did he want to see those? The closer we get to the wedding, the more demanding he gets about such things. Well, he will be your husband soon. He has a right to know what his new business will be making him, Mr. McSpadden said. Daniel, surely you don't truly feel that it is a man's right to take over a woman's business after marrying? Mary turned toward her suitor. Married women owning businesses is preposterous. A married woman should be at home running the home. I do not plan to give up the academy upon marriage. The mere thought incensed her. In reality, it didn't matter that she didn't want to give up the academy. She would once married if Charles truly pushed the issue. It was an insult to her husband for her to continue to work after they married. Even women married to no-account husbands who drank and gambled away their money were expected to suffer in silence as they and their children starved. It angered her that the world expected women to remain at home without employment, even when their husband failed to provide. She would hold her ground for as long as she could prior to the marriage. After all, there was the chance that he would come around and see things her way. If you don't trust the chap to run the business after marriage, then maybe you shouldn't be marrying him, Mr. McSpadden responded. Heat flushed up her face. How dare this man speak so freely toward her on such matters? It didn't matter that he was right, it angered her that he said what she had been thinking. Her stomach turned when a large belch broke the silence. Charles may be demanding and snobbish, but at least he was a far cry better than this ill-mannered man. She made a mental note to speak with Mary about him once they were alone. Part of her wanted to order him out of her home and away from her table. Proper ladies, however, remained polite hostesses at all times. Mary, what do you see in him? Esther asked that evening as Mary helped her prepare for bed. In who? Mary asked as she deftly unlaced the corset. In Mr. McSpadden. He is rude and ill-mannered, Esther said as Mary pulled the corset off her. I don't see what you find charming about the man. I know his manners are that of an alley cat, but I love him. Mary undid the hoop skirt and helped Esther step out of it. Surely you can understand how I feel. After all, look at you and Charles. She held the nightgown for Esther. You love him? She still wasn't sure if it wasn't Mr. McSpadden's money that had Mary so accommodating. Yes, I do love him. Rich or poor, I love that man. So I put up with his lack of manners. I work with him slowly and gently, such as we do with the students here. In time, he will no longer resemble an alley cat. Mary gave a short laugh. With the nightgown on, she sat down so Mary could brush out her hair. She felt the brush move soothingly through her hair and against her scalp. She remembered the way her mother used to brush her hair when she was a child. She had so many fond memories of her mother. She knew her mother was the proprietor of a whorehouse, but she was still a good mother in Esther's eyes. When men would come to the Peacock Club, they talked to her with respect. However, the same men on the streets would look away, and the women were very cruel to her mother, referring to them as the whore and her bastard child. As a small child, she didn't know what the words meant, but she knew they sounded bad. As she got older, the words hurt deep in her soul. Her mother, always so proud, would hold her head high and ignore them. She truly missed her mother, and wished she could speak with her one more time. Pulling herself away from the painful thoughts and memories, she focused on what Mary had said. She didn't understand how Mary felt. She would never marry Charles if he behaved the way Mr. McSpadden did. Did her need to hide the truth about herself and portray the proper lady cause her to become as snobbish as Charles and his mother? She tried to remember if before she went to school in New York, had she found behavior such as his offensive before? Or was it all a falseness inside her now? Mary, truth be spoken, I don't know how you feel. She leaned her head back, seeking the bite of the bristles against her scalp. You are marrying Charles, surely you love him. Mary continued to run the brush through her hair. I have an affection for him. I do not, however, have the kind of love that can overlook flaws. Then Daniel was correct tonight at dinner. You shouldn't marry him, Esther. Mary sat the brush down and moved to look Esther in the eyes. Esther, you must call this wedding off. I can't, Mary. You know my grandfather's will. I have to be married by Christmas Eve. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. She was beginning to feel as helpless as she did the day she learned she was all alone in the world. She wished terribly that her mother was here to guide her. Her mother's advice, if she were still alive, would be the same thing she had told Esther so many times growing up. A woman's lot in life is hard. You are building a good life here in Boston. You have the money the Academy is bringing in. Surely, you don't need your grandfather's money so badly that you would marry a man you don't love. Mary looked astonished at the prospect. The Academy is not doing well financially. Can't you see that I don't have a choice? I must marry Charles. She fought to keep the tears from falling in front of Mary. She did not want the other woman to see the weakness in her. This was her lot in life. At least it was a far cry better than her mother's lot in life had been. No one here knew she was a bastard child, born to a whorehouse madam. Here in Boston, as the owner of the Academy and Charles's fiancée, she was a proper lady. Surely that had to be enough. I can't make you not marry him. I hope you are doing the right thing for you. Mary helped her into bed and pulled the covers up as if she was a child. Turning, she extinguished the kerosene lantern before leaving the room. In the dark, Esther allowed herself to openly cry. Nothing was as easy as Mary made it all sound. It must be nice to be able to live as simply as Mary lived, love someone and ignore their ill-mannered behavior. If you do not love someone, then don't marry them. Instead, throw your entire inheritance away. No, she would marry Charles, and they would have a good marriage. She was born a bastard in a whorehouse, but she would die as a proper lady in a fine house.